we want to play a game with you that I like to play with my students sometimes. We all think we'd be able to tell the difference between a hate group and the most trusted organization for pediatric doctors in the United States. Right? Let's put that to the test.
Are you guys still looking at that stupid website?
I'm Jake. And I'm Dan, and we're both public high school teachers. Now promise me you won't cheat or Google anything ahead of time for this. Test yourself. We're going to compare the websites of two different organizations, the American Academy of Pediatrics and the American College of Pediatricians. If you'd like to play along, pause this video here and go to the websites aap.org and acpeds.org. And please give us a like and a subscribe because it really helps us grow our channel.
One of these sites is a professional association of pediatricians that promotes healthy kids and the best, most up-to-date practices in medicine while publishing monthly scientific journals. The other one, though, is a Southern Poverty Law Center designated hate group that focuses on promoting outdated and typically hyper-conservative parenting methods and promotes ideas that we know to be really harmful to kids. Now, we've used this site exploring as an exercising class for a couple of years, but we're going to play the part of somebody just exploring them so we can see which is which together. So, how does a person tell the difference between a reputable site and a disreputable one anyway? Let's use the methods that we were taught when we were in high school.
The conventional wisdom for how to tell a good website from a bad one starts with just the looks of things. Dead giveaways for a website being run by a guy sitting in his mom's basement drinking Mountain Dew are misspelled words, poor formatting, bad design, and just general sloppiness. If we start with the Academy of Pediatrics, we see a well-designed website. It's not too flashy or anything, but I wouldn't expect a professional association of doctors to be. It has clean design, bright colors, professional photos, so all that looks good. It has sections for policy and public health initiatives like immunizations and kids' media usage, so my alarm bells aren't really going off based on this criteria.
Now let's see the College of Pediatricians site. Once again, it's got a pretty clean, professional design. It's got photos of doctors with happy kids, just like you would expect. And like the Academy site, it's got a couple of links about hot topics in kids' health, like gender dysphoria, Title IX, and childhood traumas. Both organizations even have remarkably similar missions, with the AAP saying that their goal is to attain optimal physical, mental, and social health and well-being for all infants, children, adolescents, and young adults, and the ACPEDS saying that they're enabling children to reach their optimal physical and emotional health. I guess if just looking at these giveaways doesn't give it away, we're gonna have to try another method.
The name of each organization and the domain names, or the URL address, is another tool at our disposal. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like those are going to be much help here either. Now, both organizations sound great. One calls itself a college and the other one calls itself an academy. And while they obviously aren't using those terms how we would in our daily life to denote a place of learning, they are aligning themselves with the ethics that go along with a place of higher learning. For example, the pursuit of knowledge, academic honesty and academic freedom, and social responsibility. Since both organizations are doing this, it's not much of a giveaway. A URL is something our teachers always told us to check out. Back in the pioneer days of the internet, we were always told a .edu, a .gov, a .org website is more reputable than a .com or a .net site. We were always told the .com was just trying to sell you something. But both of these websites have buttons where you can donate to them, and the AAP even has a store linked in the masthead, even though neither of these are .coms. So neither one is looking more disreputable yet.
Another way to see what a site's all about is to check their About section. Both the AAP and the ACPEDS have slick-looking videos on these pages to introduce themselves. The AAP has a lot of statistics in there. It's talking about medical advancements of the last 50 years or so, and a montage of some happy-looking kids while the CGI temple gets built in the background. ACPED's video, on the other hand, has this woman with a lab coat and stethoscope telling a brief history of the College of Pediatricians and some of their philosophy. We're immediately inclined to think that she's either a doctor or the head of the organization because of her really soulless, stilted delivery of the lines. It just tells me there's no way she's a professional spokesperson. And as it turns out, she's the executive director, Michelle Cretella.
Well, those are all the tools they gave us in school, and neither one is really looking more like a hate site than the other one so far, so I guess we're gonna have to actually read.
Since no alarm bells are going off just by looking at these aspects of the website, let's actually read into their policies to see if that tells us anything. Both sites have large sections dedicated to dispensing their positions on subjects that court disagreement, like the best way to parent or where medical ethics come into play. We tried to start with something not very controversial, wondering if there were any major differences in policy even outside the spicy topics, but our first attempt didn't give us much. We looked at their guidance on media usage for kids and found some pretty predictable conclusions that young kids shouldn't spend a whole lot of time in front of screens. So we decided to pick something slightly more debated.
We know as recently as a generation or two ago, adoption wasn't nearly as universally accepted as it is today. So we thought that might be an interesting place to go next. And at the most cursory of glances, it seemed like the websites were going to kind of agree for a second. Both organizations consider adoption a good option for children who can't be raised by their biological parents. And both organizations encourage parents to consider fostering and adoption. And if we had stopped reading there, it would have been cool. But we didn't stop reading there. And holy shit, does it go downhill fast.
Now, when using these sites, we're getting kind of frustrated with the AAP's policy section because it was way harder to use than the AC PEDS, with the Academy search function and design that wasn't as fluid as the college. But after a couple of minutes, we realized it was because the AAP was linking me to PDFs and peer-reviewed articles which are published in the medical journal Pediatrics, and AC PEDS was only linking to web pages framed as statements on policy. Seriously, just about the most in-depth article we could find on AC PED's website was a 3-page endorsement of a book that's against helping young people transition, called Transcritical Analysis, Conservatives Are Not Alone, an endorsement of female erasure. Yikes.
If you search AC PED's policy on adoption, you'll get a page that does say adoption is the best choice for children who can't be raised within their natural families. And we thought that phrase, natural families, was a little weird, so we kept reading. And at the bottom of the statement, it says that adoption decisions shouldn't be subject to non-discrimination laws, which it puts in quotes. Another weird move. It says that adoption agencies should be able to consider the parent's sex, religious practices, and lifestyle when making placement decisions, which I think we all understand means they don't want gay couples to adopt. At the bottom of the statement, it cites 2 sources.
Contrast this with the AAP site, which gives you 262 results for studies, articles, and research about adoption. Under that, I was able to find an article called Promoting the Well-Being of Children Whose Parents Are Gay or Lesbian, which cites 60 different sources within it that found that children's mental and physical well-being are far more affected by their relationship with their parents and their parents' economic and social security than they are their parents' genders.
At this point, let's just spill the beans. The American College of Pediatricians is the hate site. They've done a really good job of disguising that fact on the surface, and they've obviously tried very hard to present themselves as a trustworthy group of medical professionals that cares a lot about kids' health. But once you start digging into their content, it becomes incredibly clear which of these organizations cares about medical science and which one cares about the political agenda they have to further. The problem is, by the time we had sifted through both sites, purposefully looking for examples of differences in what they recommend for kids, we had already been searching for like a half hour. We already knew one of these websites was completely untrustworthy, and it still took a little while to find a solid illustrative example of why to show you for this video.
If you're, say, a busy parent, and your kid comes out to you as trans, and you go on the web trying to figure out what that means, what you should do next, and if your child is okay, you might find a very professional looking website that claims to be a group of doctors, and you could very easily take this backwards and harmful advice from this site with complete confidence because you've been told your whole life to always do what the doctor ordered. And I think that's the point.
We should take a minute to talk about who the American College of Pediatricians are. AC PEDS was founded in 2002 in Gainesville, Florida by Joseph Zanga, a former head of the AAP, specifically in response to gay couples adopting. When the AAP released a policy statement linking gay parents to no adverse effects on children, a few dozen to maybe 100 or so members of the AAP defected. Since then, they promote a lot of junk science like gay conversion therapy, linking homosexuality to pedophilia, and have called it child abuse when trans minors are allowed to medically transition. The ACPED site says they're deeply concerned with the safety of trans youth, and that word concerned is hyperlinked, but it just goes to a 404, and the rest of the page spouts off a bunch of transphobic garbage about functionality destroying and irreversible surgeries. They've also condemned the American Psychological Association as a gay-affirming program that devalues self-restraint.
They promote physically abusive corporal punishment like spanking and slapping children as a viable option for correcting children's behavior, a practice that pretty much every other child psychology organization denounces. Their page promoting the use of spanking even admits that it leads to increased defiance and aggression in children, but only when used not as severely or in a non-abusive way. The one point we're able to award to ACPEDS is that they do promote vaccines without any qualifiers or discredited autism links.
We were able to find a figure that said ACPEDS had about 600 members, as opposed to the AAP's 67,000, which made sense to me, first of all because they're about 70 years newer, and because you're likely to find a few extreme conservatives in any profession, even the medical field. Although ACPEDS members have described their organization as a Judeo-Christian traditional values organization, the history section on their website tries to disguise that fact by describing it as being founded by a group of concerned physicians who saw the need for a pediatric organization that would not be influenced by the politically driven pronouncements of the day, which is, get this, literally the opposite of what they are. Instead of letting themselves be influenced by the political pronouncements of the day, they're not letting themselves be influenced by the actual science of the day, which you can tell because they say things like DNA determines gender, which is super outdated. Additionally, in their FAQ section, it says they're not a political organization, which is, once again, exactly what they are.
God, I wish I was dead.
They also file amicus briefs in court cases, which I'll admit I totally had to look up what an amicus brief even was. When we were scouring their websites, there was even a section called amicus briefs, but it looked like some dry legalese with dozens and dozens of links, and so we navigated away pretty quickly. Anyway, an amicus brief is a filing in a court case that an outside party will make in an attempt to back one side of that court case in hopes of swaying the decision. In ACPED's history, they've repeatedly filed these in favor of anti-choice and anti-LGBT party lawsuits. For example, in 2015, they filed a brief in the Supreme Court case Obergefell versus Hodges, which legalized marriage equality in the US. The brief asked the Alabama Supreme Court to ignore the US law and continue to define legal marriage as between one man and one woman, which cites a bogus study from two discredited social scientists that says children do worse in a same-sex parent household.
The Southern Poverty Law Center has a page on ACPEDS called In Its Own Words, and the quotes are pretty damning. Your public library might have a drag queen story hour where books like I Am Jazz are read to children by eager to groom the next generation of victims.
The transgender movement is an opening for totalitarian government.
Transgenderism is a belief that looks increasingly like a cultish religion.
Why isn't the movement of LGBT not the P-LGBT movement? P for pedophile. The activists, I think, have pedophilia intrinsically woven into their agenda.
There is sound evidence that children exposed to the homosexual lifestyle may be at increased risk for emotional, mental, and even physical harm.
In dealing with adolescents experiencing same-sex attraction, it is essential to understand there is no scientific evidence that an individual is born gay or transgender.
It's really good that the SPLC has compiled all this stuff, because ACPEDS has done a pretty decent job of burying everything about themselves being a hate group. When you search their founder, Joseph Zenga, or their executive director, that soulless lady we saw earlier, Michelle Cretella, it's not immediately apparent that either one is a threat to your kids, with one of the top links for Joseph Zenga when we were researching this video just being a really uncritical interview about his life and his career, leading with the quote, "I could be a teacher, I could work with children, I could be a scientist." And from everything we've learned, we don't think it's a good idea to put this man in any position in which he might be making decisions for the health of children.
We wanted to use the American Academy of Pediatrics and the American College of Pediatricians as a tool to show that what we've always been taught about how to determine a trustworthy site from an untrustworthy site is completely out of date and utterly insufficient for how the internet works in 2021 and beyond. Disreputable sites don't exactly look like the Space Jam website anymore. Hell, even Nazi favorite news site Breitbart has a pretty strong use of color and professional design, except for this horrifyingly cropped Dr. Phil over here. The old methods of looking for sloppiness, trusting a .org website to always tell the truth, and using only one source cannot be the way we move forward. We need to change how we evaluate the credibility of websites.
Here's what we would suggest to increase your media literacy for sites you're unfamiliar with. Anytime you're using a new source of information, or it's a site you've never visited before, or something just seems a little fishy, read laterally.
Reading laterally means that you don't just consume the content on that site, but you try to contextualize it using other web sources and listen to what they have to say about that source. That may sound kind of complicated, but what it really boils down to is just opening a bunch of different tabs at once. With this search, I could dive right here into the AC Pet site, but if I Google their name and go down just a couple of links, right-clicking and opening those tabs to cross-check what others are saying about the organization, it isn't long. In fact, it's just the second link that tells me that AC Peds is a hate group.
There are a few links here that don't cite the ACP as a hate organization, but there certainly are enough to cast doubt on any information received from them that I might have otherwise uncritically consumed before. Additionally, in the process of this search, it leads you to the AAP's much more reputable site.
I'm probably going to get some flack from other teachers for saying this, so let's just pretend I never did. But Wikipedia is actually a pretty good source when it comes to this sort of thing. At least, using one source with many other different sources helps get you closer to the truth. There's also those links at the bottom of Wikipedia's page that Wikipedia's authors used as sources.
If you're on a mobile device, this is a little harder to do, but opening up a couple of tabs in your mobile browser doesn't take too long. This may sound like a lot of work for just fact-checking, but the traditional tools we've used for evaluating the credibility of media just don't work anymore. And there are far too many bad actors out there promoting misinformation and disinformation as a way to skew public policy and public opinion that there's a lot at stake here. I mean, being uncritical of sources is partly how you get a third of Republicans believing the 2020 presidential election was stolen. You also don't need to go through this process of reading laterally every time you consume new information. There are organizations out there that you can trust. I mean, you probably don't need to fact check NPR or the New York Times. I promise you, it will take a minute or two tops to evaluate a site enough to know whether you can trust it, whether you should take it with a grain of salt, or if you can throw it out entirely.
Now, I know this isn't exactly convenient. In fact, it is 100% less convenient than not checking your sources at all. I really massively envy my grandparents just being able to listen to Walter Cronkite every night and being completely confident in what he had to say. But being an informed person is absolutely contingent on doing things like reading laterally. It's that cost that we are currently paying for this world that we've built. And just to be clear, we are absolutely not advocating for a universal distrust of all facts. The media is not a monolithic organization that's trying to lie to you. You should not categorically discount all information given by the government, but you need a healthy skepticism of new information from unfamiliar sources when examining controversial topics. But you do need to have trustworthy sources, that is, sources, plural, because if you don't, that turns you into the ultimate arbiter of truth, the only person capable of determining what is real and what isn't. And that's just as dangerous of a place to be as not seeking out any information at all.